Good evening. Today is July 15th and it is 5:29 PM. And we're starting our work session meeting with an update from Mr. Brian McCain, Chief of Staff.
Thank you, ma'am. First, the Pueblo Police Department is going to have a community meeting this Thursday, July 18th from 6 to 8 PM at El Centro de Quinto Sol at 609 East 6th Street. For more information, call Sergeant Frank Ortega at 719-553-2411. There's a phone scam going around that the police department's warning about. Pueblo Police Department is warning of a phone scam designed to get money from unsuspecting citizens. The phone number the individual is calling from is 719-220-9177. Usually the caller is a male and says one of the people's family members have been kidnapped and that they owe the cartel money. So obviously do not send this person money, but if you suspect someone is kidnapped or another crime has been committed, call the Pueblo Police Department and report it via 911. The dog park will be closed for the baseball field light pole repair on Thursday, July 18th and Thursday, July 25th. And then an update on the gambling ordinance that was passed on July 15, 2024, today. The Pueblo Police Department's Special Investigation Division executed 5 search warrants on local businesses involved in illegal gambling within the city of Pueblo. One was at 320 West Northern, 1103 North Elizabeth, 1722 South Prairie, 303 East Northern Avenue. In total, approximately $20,000 were seized as evidence along with 62 gambling machines. Many of the machines seized replicate those commonly used at Blackhawk, other casinos, that type of thing. During the operation, 11 people were cited under the new city ordinance for the following: engaging in gambling, possession of a gambling device, gambling on premise, and electronic gambling. And that concludes my update for the night.
Okay. Anything else? Any questions from council? All right, we'll proceed with our first guest, and that is Andrew Hayes from Public Works, along with his assistant Chuck. And we are going to be talking about the Public Works budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of council, good evening. So I wanted to give you a highlight of our upcoming budget submission for 2025. Obviously, budget instructions came out about 2-3 weeks ago here, so we're still in the process of developing and finalizing this. But this is a good guide, I guess, on kind of goals, objectives for what our submission will be shaped like. So give it a second. Okay. So next slide, please. All right. So just to start off, I want to give a quick background for anyone that's not aware that Public Works has 7 different operating divisions within it: engineering, transportation, traffic management, streets, facilities management, solid waste, and stormwater. Of those, stormwater is a separate enterprise. We'll talk about that separately kind of throughout the presentation. The department also manages 2 other enterprise funds: the parking enterprise and the street repair utility enterprise. But we've got these seven divisions that all operate within the Public Works Department house. Next slide, please. So what does Public Works do? Who do we serve? Obviously, we have a broad variety of different functions that we perform for internal and external customers. Obviously, our primary purpose is here to serve the public, residents and businesses both, but we do serve other internal customers here in the city as well, other city departments. Also some external agencies that offer services to the public that don't necessarily have construction management services or other things. We can provide support to them as well. So word chart on the right there kind of just highlights a few of the key major topics that we hit, but it runs the gamut from everything from things you'd expect like street maintenance, building maintenance, all the way through real estate acquisition and management, asset management, environmental compliance, On the stormwater end, of course, we're handling infrastructure projects for drainage work. We are doing MS4 permit compliance. So all of those are different functions that definitely fall within our realm. Next slide, please. So one thing that's important to mention, you can't really say Public Works does all these things by itself. It definitely does not. There are a number of internal entities in the city that also help us. So when our project load increases, so does the workload of any of these other divisions. Purchasing and finance and law, particularly, whenever we do more projects, we have more capital project throughput, they will see a proportional increase in the volume of work. Every project that we do, several actions come before council, whether it's just budgeting and appropriating funds, a resolution to award a contract, law reviews all those, purchasing is awarding those contracts, reviewing the scopes of work, ultimately making awards to contractors. Anytime there's a change order or an amendment to a contract along the way, those are several other actions that might be coming before council, again, law reviewing. So every project incrementally does add to these other departments' workloads as well. So I just want to make sure that it's not us out there running alone. These departments definitely help support us on our acquisition and construction management processes. Next slide, please. So again, I mentioned that there's going to be kind of two sets of slides for each of these, but in general, we're going to start with the general fund side, which is the Public Works operating budget. Just for a point of comparison there, we've got 2023 budget, 2024 budget, and the 2025 ask or target. That 2025 ask is still being refined, but it is intended to try to stay at or below our 2024 ask or original budget amount. In the 2023 budget, you can see that we expended 8 million of the 10 million or so that was there, and about a little more than 2/3 of that, about 85% of that was non-expended budget. Of the non-expended budget was from salary savings. So in 2023, we had unfilled positions that provided back some salary savings to the city. Obviously, that money doesn't get spent. It goes right back into the general fund, but it certainly could be allocated differently for future use. 2024, we have so far, as of July 5th, executed 4.2 million of the 10.2 in our 2024 budget. We are on track to spend most of our budget this year in terms of, I don't think we'll see the same salary savings level we saw last year. We have filled quite a few of those higher level positions that were open throughout the year. And again, in 2025, we're trying to keep our targeted ask here down below for our operating budget at or below the 2024 ask. Next slide, please. Similar slide here for stormwater. Again, in 2023 and 2024, 3.8 million to 4.1 million originally budgeted. In 2023, 2.85 was expended. And again, about 54% of that was from salary savings from open positions. In 2024 here, we are about 1.3 million expended. So little more, about a little more than a third of our budget is expended so far to date on that. Okay, next slide, please. So with department staffing, this slide just tries to highlight the different divisions again, and the two numbers at the bottom in the red reflect the number of authorized positions, and then the number in parentheses is the number of unfunded. So there are authorized positions that are not funded, and that number is reflected there. So on streets, for instance, there are 6 unfunded positions, a couple of equipment operator 2s, I believe, and a couple 4 utility worker 1s. So in that particular case, those are just positions that are authorized in the staffing ordinance, but just not funded. So they are vacant. And then in stormwater, you've got one that is the director of stormwater. That position is filled by Mr. Hawkins now, that position is filled by me. I wear the hat as director of stormwater. Mr. Hawkins is now the engineering stormwater manager. But within the enterprise, we've kept that position. In 2024, it was unfunded, so that position doesn't go away as the director of the enterprise. Traffic maintenance, there are 2 unfunded positions. There are senior traffic signal technicians that we don't have we didn't, at least as of last year, have anybody qualified for. Coming up in a minute, we'll talk here about the proposed changes, but there are traffic signal technicians and senior traffic signal technicians, and we're going to ask to convert one of those positions into a senior traffic signal maintenance technician. Overall, there's 108 authorized positions within the Public Works Department. That's across both the Stormwater Enterprise and the Public Works General Fund budget. 99 of those positions are funded at the moment, 87 filled. 12 vacancies, but a couple of those are retirements that have been turned in already. So right now, I believe it's 9 total positions that are vacant as we speak. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go back one. So let me just detail, I guess, kind of our proposed changes and talk about where those are coming from. We currently have a project coordinator. That position handles a lot of the pre-contract award liaison with CDOT or FHWA or other entities from whom we receive grants. A lot of other pre-project coordination as well on working with utilities, Black Hills, everybody else. So there's quite a bit of load that position carries. But there used to be a position that was a managerial staff level position called Capital Projects Manager. The title may not have been quite that, but essentially we want to create that position back, move the funding from this projects coordinator position into that position to cover the vast majority of that switch. The police department has a half-time role for I believe somebody who's taking care of facilities maintenance kind of issues in the building. We've been talking with police leadership there about getting a full-time facilities maintenance technician that's dedicated to PMJC, keeping, they can be a generalist taking care of plumbing issues or HVAC issues, taking care of the general stuff that can be handled by a single crew member. Doesn't mean that the rest of our facilities department wouldn't respond if there was something that was needed, but somebody's dedicated to that facility. We do have almost daily issues going on in PMJC with respect to HVAC work. So a lot of that pulls on that load, or that load pulls on the 2 HVAC technicians that we do have in our facilities maintenance division. With 1.5 million square feet, about 300-ish facilities in our inventory. PMJC is one that gets a lot of attention, mainly because it's so important operationally to us, but also just because of the burden that is borne by the HVAC technicians in there. So what we're, I guess, looking for here is an HVAC, a facilities maintenance technician that would be funded out of the part-time funding from the half-time position there, and looking for the other half of that funding for a new facilities maintenance tech that would be dedicated to PMJC. HVAC maintenance technicians, too, what that's referring to is in this past few years, we have been starting facilities condition assessments and inventories of all our facilities. We have identified a 3,000 labor hour per year shortfall in preventive maintenance work that is being deferred that we cannot get to because our HVAC technicians are out taking care of repairs or corrective maintenance, emergency repairs. So we have about 3,000 labor hours of shortfall there. So that is about 1.5 FTEs worth of HVAC technician time that could be better spent than us contracting that kind of work out. So we're asking for 2 HVAC maintenance technicians to fill that gap. We have an energy manager that is part-time right now. He's a part-time energy coordinator. That's George Andrews. If anybody's visited the Energy Advisory Commission or been in a few presentations in here, George has helped us out with all of our energy performance contracting work that we're getting ready to start here. A lot of our EV work, all of our energy related initiatives, all of those kind of work through George. He's got 1,300 hours a year that we get to use, I guess, through the year. And so if at our current rate right now, we're going to burn him up in October and we don't get him for the rest of the year. So trying to figure out a way to get him on full time. An opportunity presented itself here where we're in the process of applying for a grant that will, if funded, would pay for most of that full-time equivalent salary. So that could be a no cost to the city to add him in, but it would be an immensely valuable position to have, especially as we're entering into our energy performance contract work next year, or excuse me, later this year. I mentioned just a minute ago, the senior traffic signal technician. This is again, a swap of a position. We would unfund one of the regular traffic maintenance technician positions. There'd be a slight increase on the higher salary for the senior traffic signal technician. But we finally got somebody who has enough experience to qualify for that senior role. And it's important to make sure we're rewarding those folks that are performing well. So I'd like to make sure that position opens up and see if anybody passes that test and can make it. The senior planner position is a holdover from 2021. We had a senior planner position moved into our department. That position has been converted into the project coordinator position I was previously mentioning. But this position has still been funded through this year. So it'll be eliminated and abolished. That's about $110,000 savings for fringe and salary benefits overall that will come back. And then we are working through reorganization of our facilities maintenance division and trying to create a structure in there that is facilitates growth, facilitates a way for us to hire apprentices and grow them into journeyman or master level technicians. So we're looking at we're rewriting all the position descriptions for all of those trades positions. So we basically have a level 1, level 2, level 3 role for each of the electrician, plumber, HVAC technician, and all of the experience and job requirements tie back to industry standards for those roles. So we're writing those positions associated with that right now. Most of the technicians that we have are paid significantly lower than market rate for their positions. So we're rewriting the pay bands to kind of match in there as well. But those increases will certainly help with recruiting retention. But one of the issues we have right now is with licensure. So there are certain trades that are required to be licensed by the state, or that are licensed by the state that are required to put their license up with the city. There are some of our other trades like carpenters and painters that are professionals, but aren't necessarily, they're licensed through regional or other places, but they are not necessarily licensed through the state. This basically creates a level playing field across the board here where all of our technicians would have again, at that master level, a different level 3 pay band than the current level 2, but it also creates a level 1 below that. So that if we have a vacancy and we need to hire, for instance, 2 HVAC maintenance technicians, I don't need to hire them necessarily at the master level. We could hire them in at apprentice or journeyman level. So we've got folks that can grow into those roles. So that's the cap on department staffing here. Okay, next slide. Again, high level capital improvements projects here. Roads obviously continue to be an issue. We've been funding the roads program here at $10 million a year. That money has come from savings from Tabor that has been expended. So going into 2024, the burden of that would be completely taken out of general fund if we didn't make any changes here. So what we're asking to do is reinstate the street repair utility enterprise for 2025. That would ultimately need to result in a rate study that would give us a $5 million revenue stream, but that would take a $5 million capital burden off of the general fund. We do get $2.5 million a year from the state. That's what the HUTF portion is up there. And then we still have $2.5 million towards roads taken out of the general fund. With respect to facilities, CIN 20 is our facility repair account. It's the one that anytime there's an emergency or sometimes planned repairs as well at this point, those projects are generally funded out of that CIN 20 account. Looking to replenish that account, expecting about $700,000 worth of expenses this next year there. CIN 22 is a specific account dedicated to roof repairs. Funds that come in there are often from insurance proceeds that come back from claims. So we've got a little bit of money that's sitting there, but we have a big repair coming up on the ice arena next year. That particular facility is going to need some additional funds for that. Those funds will ultimately be refunded. So once we do the work, that money will be reimbursed back to the city. But anytime there's a hailstorm, anytime there's something there, we will have funds in this account to be able to take care of any roof repairs or roof issues that come up. The other down here at the bottom, if anybody has driven down Lime Road lately, Lime Road is the road that goes just to down in the south end of town, exit 91-ish, I believe, off Stem Beach. But it's the road that goes back past GCC, back to CS Wind. It's a concrete road that was constructed several years back and does not have any rebar in it. We had put a bid out to do some repairs on that road last year, got a bid back of about 2.5-ish million. It ranged from 2.4 to 2.7. And the way we squeezed that in at that time, it wasn't the right cost. We thought that was a little bit high. We are asking to fund that project out of economic development funds. That is, again, kind of our economic development breadbasket down there for making sure we've got good highway access for those industrial activities that are taking place there at the south end town and in the industrial park. So that's a unique ask, different from our previous budget requests where we've had all of that funded either out of road repair money or out of general fund. Next slide, please. So just a couple of opportunities here that are things that we want to work on that are potential cost savings for the city in general, not necessarily just for general fund, but we've been working really hard on this asset management program, and I'll keep saying it, and you'll keep hearing me say asset management, but may get tired of it. But what it means to us is we are actively and deliberately taking care of the facilities that we've got. We have across the city about $5 billion worth of infrastructure, 5 billion with a B. And so that much investment requires some kind of active management. It can't be just us constantly putting out fires or responding to operational concerns because something has failed. So this asset management program helps us get ahead of that by doing condition assessments, identifying preventive maintenance schedules for activity or for facilities and infrastructure that ultimately keep us operating, keep our quality of life good, keep our roads open, and everything else. It's going to be really important, I think. Right now, I would say 90 to 95% of the, for instance, facilities trouble calls that we respond to are corrective maintenance. I'd really like to drive that down. I really want to get that down below 50% is kind of an initial goal. We've gotten through 2/3 of our building condition assessments. We've set up preventive maintenance schedules for all of those facilities, all of those systems in there. So being able to tackle and do that preventive maintenance is certainly going to help us drive down the number of emergency repair calls that we get. One of the places that is across not just my department, but with wastewater, with stormwater, and with the street repair utility enterprises, utility billing services opportunity. That utility billing services, what I'm referring to is we pay the Board of Water Works somewhere in the ballpark of $900,000 a year to just perform the billing services for our enterprises. So we have separate agreements for each. I want to say that the costs actually range depending on the size of the utility. I want to say wastewater is somewhere in the $600 to $650 range that they pay. I would think $200 to $250, somewhere in that ballpark for stormwater, and about $80K a year for the street repair utility. For $900,000 a year, I think we can find a way to do the billing, either in-house or through another contract. So this is just something we're going to try to explore, get some more information back. And if we can get that into in time for a 2025 budget submission, we'll get that in. But that's another opportunity we're just actively looking at, trying to find a way to do this smartly. I mentioned previously also we have our energy performance contract work that's going on. Again, received proposals from 7 different offerers, but we're going to see a whole slate of energy efficiency projects that are going to be offered up to us that we can take advantage of. Again, those projects will be guaranteed payback. The ESCO, the company that's going to do this energy audit, has to guarantee the amount of savings that's going to be there, because those savings will be used to finance the capital projects that they support. So this is more than just going through the building and saying maybe we could save some money with some insulation here. They actually need to measure. They need to put meters on equipment, measure how much consumption there is. But those are going to be great opportunities for us because we don't need a huge capital outlay to go throw new equipment into some of these buildings. We're going to see lower energy bills in the long term. Ultimately, consumption will go down over the long term. And once those projects are paid back off, the city enjoys lower cost of energy going forward from that point. So that's the structure of these energy performance contracts, but this is going to be a big deal for next year. And I just mentioned to you again, also with respect to street repair utility, again, shifting some of the burden off of general fund into the street repair utility. There's an opportunity here for us in this particular case to ask is $5 million, but we're doing the rate study now to figure out what that new rate would look like. Again, our current rate structure was in there was raising just a little bit less than $2.5 million a year. And so that's where we're headed with that particular place. That concludes my presentation. Did I leave anything out, Chuck? Okay. I think we're next slide. I'll take any questions you've got.
All right, any questions from council? Counselor Flores?
Could you go back to the very beginning? I think you called it your roles and responsibilities. And I just wanted you to kind of explain the difference as far as the chain of command here. Because in that roles and responsibilities, you've got Parks and Rec.
Oh, yeah.
So the question is, I thought Stephen Myers was a director, just like you're a director.
Correct.
And so I'm wondering why that still falls under.
So to the point here, these are supported organizations. So we do projects, we do construction management execution for these departments. So not always for wastewater. They do some of their own projects as well, but we're executing 3 projects, ARPA projects that they're going to be the beneficiary of ultimately. We do oversee construction management for projects out at the airport. What that does for us by having a centralized construction management unit in the Public Works Department, you don't have different sets of inspectors. You don't have contractors with differing sets of expectations on how they deal with city. There's a process and a pathway here for how procurement happens, how invoices get paid, how quickly that happens. So those are things that we safeguard pretty closely because our ability to do business with these contractors and get them paid and through is very, very important to our success.
I'm just thinking from a management standpoint, because if you go down here further, you've got the HARP Authority, who has their own autonomy, their own bylaws, their own board. You got SRDA, and I guess I need to understand how you guys interact.
Sure. So in those 2 particular cases, the HARP Authority, obviously, we're working with them right now on the HARP channel or the channel extension project and the boathouse. Again, those are city projects for new construction. So that's why those are being executed by the city. The HARP Authority has authority to perform operations and maintenance of the facilities that they are entrusted with, but they're still city-owned property. With respect to SRDA leases the building that they're in from the city. And so again, a city facility, when there are facility-related issues that they handle, that's great. But to the extent that they need help, when they're building an extension right now, they're contemplating an extension. I think it's in design right now. Those kinds of things certainly get routed back through us and we're working with them to get those projects completed. So those are kinds of supportive. They're certainly not under us in a chain of command, but helping them through those construction management issues.
The reason I bring
part
that
of what we
up
do.
is that there are, and I'm really looking at our phone directory here, but if you look at the phone directory, I'm highlighting all of these various departments, because this is a department list of organizations where we have contractual arrangements, and the zoo is one
Zoo,
example.
correct.
HARP Authority is another. We've got the health department on here.
Also,
We've got regional building, and I highlighted Ice Arena.
Mhm.
As I understand, that falls under Parks and Rec, but we have a contractual arrangement, almost like a lease arrangement with the Bulls.
that's correct.
But here's my question. My question has to do with, and let me step back. About 5 years ago, we had a huge need for a roof where the penguins are at the zoo. And it kind of got muddied up, and one council member who he had the right question to ask, but he says, why are we messing with that? I mean, they're contractually with us. We have an arrangement. That's their problem. Let them handle it through their insurance, not knowing that all those assets are owned by us. And here's my question is, how do we, it's very rare for us to see maintenance that needs to be done at the animal shelter building, as an example. And I think the county is fully responsible there. But who brings forth the needs of the zoo?
Sure.
Okay. Who has that responsibility? If they have their own autonomy, where is it within the budget? Because they need maintenance money out there, and they're looking at trying to clean up the place, various areas there. And I use that only as an example because I think you could say that also about the Ice Arena, which you did mention.
East Side Child Care Center,
uh,
museums. right? I mean, your point is well taken. So
Well, I'm
what-
just talking about organizations that are contractually
we have,
providing services, but we
Sure.
own the assets.
and all of those in those cases, what I'm just mentioning to you is our city-owned facilities that we have
Yes.
leased to others. Goodnight Barn
Mhm.
is actually working on a lease right now for that one. There are a number of facilities that the city owns, and how do we communicate those needs? The answer is through these condition assessments that we've been doing. So we have, again, hired the consultant to go and do these condition assessments to make sure we have an accurate inventory of what we own. We know the condition of what we own. Even though the zoo operates out of those facilities, the city certainly has an interest in A, ownership, but B, in making sure that those facilities are maintained to a standard that doesn't put anybody else in harm's way. Every lease agreement that we have for each of these facilities specifies the maintenance arrangements. So Ice Arena is different than the zoo, than the museums. So where we have a city-owned facility, we have very deliberately gone out and assessed, inspected, and made sure that that's in our database. So we're tracking that and we're providing condition assessment reports on those specific facilities to those entities as well. When we have
Is
preventive,
the zoo included in that?
this one, I don't think this one. is.
That would
It's
fall,
coming-
that would fall under
It's
the.
coming up
Parks
in our
and
third
Rec.
phase.
Would that,
Well, so any facility. So one of the pieces we have in the past few years also tried to provide some centralized facility management. Not everybody's looking at the same thing,
Mhm.
and treating one building one way and one building another doesn't work. It's just not. Parks is running programs and operations, and they got some facilities folks to take care of some things. They do a great job.
so the buck
But-
stops with you.
Well,
on
construction and
All,
And
all
we're
of the-
trying to help offer them, again, asset management services here too, so they know what they may need to do to keep their pools running, or the nature center up and running, the Beulah Mountain Park. All of those different facilities would be.
you see
taken
why
care of
that,
here.
to me, it looks fragmented.
Yes,
But it makes a lot of sense that there's just one central spot for all of
Yeah.
our assets.
It has
Whether
felt
it's real
fragmented.
property or whether it's
it
business,
is.
personal property.
It has felt fragmented to me, and we're trying to get to a place where we've got all the real property. So that's improvements and land. So just real estate in a database with deeds everywhere, everything in one place, so that when somebody calls up with a question, we have everything in one place. We're not doing 2 weeks of research to try to figure out whether we own it, what is the maintenance arrangement on it, all of that stuff. So this has been a work in progress for the past 3 years, and we're trying to get through the third of 3 phases this year if we can finish that up, or early
Yeah, my
next.
last question would be, because I did tour the zoo, it's been about 6 months ago. And, they have some needs out there.
Yep.
Was anything done to look at their situation this year?
So that's part of our facilities condition
Okay.
assessment. So we are going to, I think they're in our third phase. So,
Before we finalize our budget?
I don't think it'll be in time for the finalization of the budget this year. We can make some estimations based on facility square footage. Out there, we've been talking with Abby too about, different initial needs here too. So if there is something that is an emergency that is not their obligation to take care of, we're going to look at those things all the time. Those are ongoing. That's how the city has been responding to facilities issues so far. So until we get a full capital plan in front of us and a preventive maintenance schedule that makes sense for all of our facilities, we'll be continuing to respond when needed for those emergencies.
So all we're doing right now is just reacting to
Mostly,
situations.
mostly 90 to 95% of our facilities work. If you look at the work orders that have been executed, most of those are corrective maintenance, not preventive maintenance. Most of the preventive maintenance has been deferred because we can't get to it. Thank you.
Counselor Aliff, we'll just go. down the line.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a couple questions, a couple things that stood out to me. So in the last 3 or 4 years, the department, as far as wages and I believe you've added some employees and things like that, but wages are up about $600,000-700,000. Is that right?
I'd have to go back and look at the wage specifically from 2021 over, but
Maybe 500,000, whatever. So what specifically has changed from 21 to now? Are we better? Have we done more? Are we just at the status quo and we just keep adding expenses to stay where we're at? Or what specifically can you point out that has drastically or improved.
I would say unequivocally we're better than we were 3 years ago. And then I'll quantify that by saying, in 2020, I believe it was somewhere in the ballpark of about 30 or 40 projects were executed by the Public Works Department. That number has climbed over the last several years. I think we are at 50 or 60 so far this year, but we ended last year with over 71 projects completed. So we have quadrupled the output in terms of the number of projects being executed, certainly in the work in place. So that's a term we use, WIP, for construction dollars invested, or I guess construction dollars executed is what I should say. That number has climbed, and we have done most of that, not necessarily on adding a ton of billets or new positions, but really on reshaping the organization. Again, trying to centralize that construction management piece, put these inspectors out on the job, get them commonized so they're seeing the same thing. I don't have an asphalt inspector and a concrete inspector anymore. Everybody's doing all the inspections. And I've got associate field engineers that are working at a little bit higher level, working with contractors and doing a little more in-depth construction management. And we've got a construction manager position that oversees that underneath our engineering manager. So from an organizational perspective, our ability to execute projects has hands down better, unequivocally, no question. The asset management piece that we talked about is a huge deal. Just trying to understand, what do we own? What kind of condition is it in? Knowing these are bills that are going to come due at some point. We're going to pay something for these buildings, whether we're going to demolish them, whether we're going to keep operating them, but we need to know what we've got. When I got here in 2021, we were trying to figure out how many roads, how much do we need for roads? Nobody was looking at any of the residential streets. We were trying to figure out, some of the main arterials and collector roads. They were doing the best they could, I think, but we've really turned that around. We did a condition assessment of all the pavements across the city, all 500 miles of road. That has given us a baseline for prioritizing the work that we've been doing over these last 3 years. We've executed well on the $10 million a year that's gone into those road projects. We're in the middle of executing the 2024 budget now and preparing the list for 2025. We certainly have far more requirements than resources. We recognize that. We know we're asking for a lot to be put forward, but believe that we are executing it well. So.
The second thing is that what's really near and dear to my heart is the residential and commercial development. So Public Works plays an integral part of the subdivision, residential, all of the things that are necessary to ensure that that's a smooth and easy process and that things go good within the city. Perception is that, and it may be reality, I don't know, maybe you know something different than I know. But the perception is that our commercial and residential development is at an all-time low as opposed to any time previous. Even if you look at this year, it's like horrendous in the city. Are there specific things that are happening? Do you think that you're better than we were? Are we making progress? I mean,
Sure.
It's critical. I mean, we can do city projects and we can do all the things that you're tasked with, and that's a huge responsibility. But in the long run, if we don't have robust commercial and residential development, our economic engine is shut off and we're just doing what you said earlier. You're just going around and fixing things and making sure this is okay, that's okay, but there's nothing happening.
Yep.
How do you feel about
Sure.
that, and what do you think?
So in that, again, word chart there where we're kind of outlining some of the public works functions, commercial and residential development were two things that were specifically listed. That is a key role that we play in there. Our role primarily involves looking at the improvements that are required in the public right of way related to any kind of development, whether that's residential or commercial. I will say again, in 2021, we implemented OpenGov. The system is good. It is able to help us manage the workflows that come in. Can it be improved? Always. A lot of what could be improved in there might be related to workflow design. So us shaping permit applications to make them easier to submit, more efficient. Part of, I know what we're trying to do also is when a developer or a builder comes in to start a project, they generally start at Butler Regional Building Department. They're the gatekeeper for stuff at the building permit time for any of those projects going on, whether they're commercial, residential, anything. Regional plays a key role in making sure that we get notified when there's projects coming in. But our systems have been linked and they do talk. Sometimes it's user error or things like that where a notification may not get back to regional. So folks call up and ask for a status update on a project. But those are the kinds of little places where I think we can continue to improve and make it so folks aren't having to chase us down to get permits through. I think as a baseline though, the system is good. It works. It communicates with regional. It is also common, not the same exact system, but the same type of system that folks deal with in the county side. So if they're used to dealing with OpenGov out on a county project, they come to the city, the interface is the same. So they're familiar with it. Our codes and our workflows are a little bit different, but the system is the same. So they aren't necessarily having to learn a whole new permitting system up front. So that's good. We talked about this kind of at the building permit side, but on the subdivision side of things too, this is another place where developers come in and this is a statutory process, right? Under state law, we again are looking at a number of compliance related issues during subdivision. Our subdivision process is broken into two parts. The part one really is kind of the plat development, plat approval process. It involves making sure that we have the right land layouts for all of the right of ways we need, for all of the utility easements, everything else that needs to be installed there. Part two deals with the design and ultimately construction of the public improvements that are called for. So that involves developing a subdivision improvement agreement, a phasing plan, making sure that the items that are called for in the plat are planned out in a way that can be executed so that somebody pulling a building permit over here doesn't get left without sewer, for instance, or something like that. It's an extreme example, but the phasing plan is an important part of that. And so all of those pieces come together. Planning generally is the gatekeeper for the part one of the process, and public works serves as the gatekeeper for the part two. So we see different levels of development right now. This year's been slow on residential for sure. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. That would be something Scott could speak better to, I think. But I would say that we've noticed a lot fewer residential building permits coming in. We still see a lot of subdivision work. Developers who are interested in annexing, vacating, getting properties ready for building permits. But that doesn't necessarily translate into building permits right this moment. I'd say given mostly interest rate conditions and whatnot on the residential side. On the commercial side, I don't know that that's slowed down very much. It's felt like we've seen a large number of both subdivision activity and building permits as well. Some of you may be aware, one of the challenges, and Scott spoke to it, I believe, in his presentation as well, but we are challenged somewhat, I think, by interactions with CDOT in particular on subdivision related activities. So when a developer comes in and needs to develop a property, if they're adjacent to a state highway, CDOT has a different role than sometimes where they are located further away. So CDOT controls access to and from state highways. There's a state highway access code that governs that process and how that works. CDOT has sometimes a differing interpretation than we do about what their level of authority is in a process, and that can sometimes slow things down in a review process with a developer. CDOT's review timelines also aren't necessarily the same as ours. We try to, every time we get a submittal in, we try to turn it back around in about 10 days for the most part, depending on the type of activity we're talking about. CDOT has statutorily some different timelines, so they can take more time, and it can feel like the city is the cause of that. Sometimes we are also trying to step in and help developers who are experiencing those challenges, particularly on the access permitting front. We've been able to work with CDOT on I guess, negotiating the level of public improvements that are required the negotiating the amount of contribution that a developer is expected to contribute. Those are significant challenges to a development project when they come late in the game or when they're holding up a building permit, when there's a restaurant trying to get ready to open. Those are huge challenges for a developer and a builder. And for somebody who just has one project going and it's their livelihood, it can make or break a project. And so we're very sensitive to that, and we're trying to work with those developers to the extent that they are comfortable with us intervening and helping with that process as well. But that's an opportunity, I think, for us going forward in trying to help facilitate commercial and residential development here.
And then finally, I just want to talk about the streets. Can you go to that?
Streets,
The street repair.
that one right there, I think.
You had a report, you had some numbers
There
up
we go.
there.
I think this is the one.
So 10 million for roads, 2.5 from the highway user transportation fund, 2.5 million from the general fund, and 5 million from a street repair utility enterprise, which is not in place. So you're going through and you're trying to figure that out. What's always interesting is that if you look at the highway user transportation fund, it's always constantly brought in about $5 million, right? And out of that $5 million, we've always had to pay the Dillon flyover debt, with Faster and all that other stuff. You were shaking your head. You don't think it's 5 million?
Into the capital budget, we've taken 2.5.
No.
Or
So I'm just talking about how much the city gets from the highway user transportation fund, not how much you get.
So historically, the state, the street repair utility plus the highway user tax, we've got about $5 million total between those two.
I know.
Not $5 million from that one HUTF.
I know, and that's my argument here.
Okay.
So my argument is we take in $5 million. If you even look at the budget and the way that it's broke out, there was let's just take projected for 2023, 4.9 million. And out of that 4.9 million, you got $2.5 million. Even if you pay the Faster debt and projects to be determined 550,000, that's 3.2 million, which leaves what, almost $2 million. Where does that $2 million go? That's not a question for you. You don't have anything to do with it. So where's the other $2 million go?
President Aliff, I think it has to be specific to bridges, and we have a whole separate account for that.
Specific, okay, but it's never laid out in the budget. So you just think, so conspiracy theorists like myself think that the $2 million goes to somewhere crazy in the budget to pay off one thing or another thing. And it never gets used for what it's intended for, which I know is not true. It does, but it would be nice if the budget completely painted you a picture of where that money goes.
Yeah, we're gonna work on that this year, as I'm sure you're even looking at, Public Works, right? So you get this, council gets this, the public gets this as just one pager, right? There's 7 divisions in this one page. So even as I've been going through this, trying to figure out which account belongs to who, how much money is being spent, this is 7 divisions all wrapped into this. So without being able to log on to Munis or be the mayor and pull certain accounts to see the dollar amounts and know that these are 7 separate divisions that all roll into Public Works, this does not paint an accurate picture of how the dollars are being spent, especially when you're talking about the highway user. So for next year's budget, we are going to work on dividing these up into divisions. So whether it's streets, Public Works, the engineering portion of it, exactly where those dollars are being spent. And by what account, because this does not give you a good indication of how this money is broken up in these bigger departments like.
Well, if you go into
Public Works.
H6 breaks out the highway user transportation fund. It has nothing to do with Public Works. Nothing.
Well-
It's just the highway user transportation fund.
But that fund
Lottery.
also has separate accounts that it's broken
I get
into.
that.
That's what
I
I'm
get
trying
that.
to tell you.
So, but there's almost $2 million that you can't see where it's at.
There
when
is.
when you look at the budget. That's all I'm
Yeah.
saying. So the interesting thing comes up. So like even in 2018, we had an $80 million budget. An $80 million budget. We were $5 million short on road repairs. Nobody was doing road repairs. We wanted to do road repairs. And that's when shortly after that, we came up with the street repair utility to try and create some money. But now we're at $133 million budget or $134 million budget, and we still don't have money for roads. It's the most bizarre thing that it's just hard to grasp as a citizen that we're bringing in 50 million more dollars, but we cannot allocate enough money to fix our roads. And then we think that it's okay, or that somehow, well, we don't have that money and we're not ready to allocate the money to the roads. So let's just reinstitute the street repair utility and further tax the community for the roads. And my argument's always been that you pay the taxes when you register your car, you pay your taxes when you get your license plate. The state, when you get gasoline, the state gives us a rebate back, which is the Highway User Transportation Fund, which is supposed to be used on our roads and to do these projects that we talk about. Back when we were in the recession, City Council decided that they were going to take those Highway User Transportation Funds and they were going to use them to help pay for personnel in transportation or the streets department or whatever, so they didn't have to lay people off. But then as times got better, they never did do anything else with the highway user transportation money. They just kept the money in there and never fixed any roads. And then 10 years later, we're trying to figure out how we're going to fix the roads, because it was the number one thing with the community. Get our roads fixed. My goodness, we pay enough taxes and do all we can do to make this happen. So now we're fighting with we're very upset about an increase in our Black Hills Energy bills that they're trying to bring forth. It's going to further burden our community. City Council wouldn't allow wastewater to raise their rates again because we were cognizant of the fact that we didn't want to further burden the community. I find it hard to believe that council will say, yeah, we're ready to reinstitute the street repair utility and further burden the community who's already paying their taxes. I mean, this is just an observation. I just think that when you have $135 million budget, you ought to find $10 million in there to fix your roads every year. And something else has to go away. What that is, I don't know. That's not my department. That's above my pay grade, but I think it's a hard sell to reinstitute that when the city is taking in more revenue than ever. And we're still not addressing that. I imagine Councilor Flores could comment on the same thing. I mean, this has been a problem from day one. How do you can't do it because you only make $80 million a year. And now we still can't do it because we make $135 million a year. When we get to 200 million, I guess maybe we can get some money. I'm good.
If I could, one of the pieces that's very important, I think, is that, again, where we were doing this pavement condition assessment that helped us quantify the need, that was a piece that was always missing. And again, in 2022, going to 2023, we developed a model that kind of shows varying scenarios under which we fund roads at different levels. So right now, if we continue to fund roads at $10 million a year, that path puts us on a path where we maintain our pavement condition index, the average condition of all our roads across our network. That stays the same, but we actually end up in a worse condition because the roads that we've got right now, we got a lot of fair condition roads, but over time, those degrade into very poor, or the ones that have been touched are green and good. So it's important at some point we look at that model, I suppose, and figure out where the right timing is to make the investment that's necessary to kind of get over this hump. Part of what we're trying to do with this asset management program is institute the lowest cost of ownership of all of our infrastructure assets. And it gets incrementally more expensive to do work if we defer it. If it falls off the ledge and becomes, instead of just a microsurfacing project, it becomes a mill and overlay, becomes a full rebuild. Add zeros at the end of every unit cost of all of this. It gets incrementally more exponentially more expensive as we go forward. So we really want to try to make sure that we're spending the money at the right time on the projects that that ultimately save the taxpayers the most money. So absolutely very, very sensitive to making sure we're spending money effectively and trying to figure out the right place to spend it. Sometimes people call and ask about certain roads that are in very poor condition in the city. And sometimes it's just not the right investment because there's another project that would be incrementally more if we deferred it. And so those kinds of decisions are important. Obviously, this goes to your point here about making sure we're maximizing the use of all the resources we've been allocated. I understand completely. I just want to share that piece with you as something that's come up in the last couple of years.
Well, gentlemen, I would guess that if you were in charge of the entire budget and allocations, you would allocate the money straight out of the general fund with the highway user tax to make sure that you guys are funded. You know, it has been council and previous administrations that have, you know, they're in charge of what, basically saying what you're going to get. So one thing I do like about your department that I've seen since I've been here is the implementing specifications. So when we lay down some work in this community and do capital improvements, we're looking at things that are preventative for future because there had been no specifications in place. And that's why we get a lot of the failure in our streets and sidewalks and so forth and asphalt and all of that. So I really appreciate you doing that. I've seen that done, you know, across the nation with the municipalities bringing those specifications in place, even though that it doesn't sit well with, you know, local developers and so forth that have been developing in this community. So I do appreciate that. As far as, you know, are we overwhelmed with city assets? Is there a point where we have so much that we can't maintain? Because, you know, we look at the contractual agreements that we have with a lot of these businesses, organizations that are leasing our properties and so forth. And we're putting, I mean, tons of money into maintenance and keeping them maintained. And, you know, they're conducting their businesses in those, and they don't have to worry about that, you know, and they're still making money for their organizations and so forth. And yet we're sinking a lot of money. Are we overwhelmed? Would that be something in the assessment that would come and say, you know, this isn't cost effective? Because, you know, I attended an event at the Nature Center over 4th of July, and it's just like a weed patch. I hadn't been down there in a while. And as I went down there, I was truly disappointed because it used to be a beautiful facility and it's not at this time. And so are we overwhelmed, and are we in that assessment, are they going to tell us that maybe possibly this is something that isn't going to be beneficial for us to hold on to as an asset so that we could somehow let it, you know, sell it in the future?
Sure.
Or
I think
Yeah.
part of to the answer, tell me if I don't answer completely, but I think that again, our asset management program
Mhm.
is collecting the information that we need to make good management decisions about how we lease city assets to
Mhm.
entities. There are programs out there that offer good benefits to the public, right?
Mhm.
And so there are policy decisions that council can make and set that you know, may involve the city providing facilities at a cheaper rate. But there are also folks that use the facilities for things that maybe aren't as high in public value. And so those are opportunities where council can make a decision about the lease agreements that we set So that's part of what we're tracking in our asset management system here is kind of the differences in maintenance obligations with respect to these facilities.
Mhm.
We have a variety of different arrangements out there. Some of them are city building. They take care of everything. City building, they take care of a few things and we take care of the bulk.
Mhm.
So there's a range and it's not like there's one set arrangement for all of the different city facilities that we own that are leased out. So again, to the extent that an entity leasing a city facility needs support from us or whatnot, the ability of the city to provide facility management services or facility maintenance services, it's possible and the systems are in place now. So to your question, are we overwhelmed? There's a lot to do all the time.
Mhm.
We're very busy, but we are putting into place the foundational structures and programs and systems that we need to manage those facilities effectively. So I hope that
Yeah,
answers your question.
I guess too, part of my question is, are we overwhelmed financially? Like, are we getting a return on our investment when we're leasing to, these organizations? Are they at least paying for because it seems like we're constantly supplementing the losses. When we did do some improvements we improved money to the zoo, it was all for salary reasons.
When some
Yeah.
of our operating and lease agreements
Mhm.
involve more than just the building maintenance or building operations
Correct.
portion. Some of them are program things, right?
Yes.
You mentioned the Nature Center, Beulah Mountain Park,
Mhm.
that's under a programmatic arrangement that includes maintenance.
Mhm.
The Eastside Child Care Center, for instance, is a facility that is city owned that we've leased to them, but it's on a lease from 1981. It's probably worth reviewing and seeing if we're still in a place we want to be.
Yeah.
All of those different arrangements are set and each lease is unique. I can't say that there's been some standard. And so
Correct.
again, to the extent that council sees value in offering an incentive or facility services or something we want to provide in order to make sure a public service is provided,
Mhm.
that's fine. Those are things that we can make happen through these lease arrangements.
Mhm.
But
But
as
right
those
now-
expire, we want to bring those forward for consideration by council as in future years.
Yeah.
That's partly what we're doing in this asset
Because
management
right
system.
now, council really has no idea
Yeah.
what is happening with any of those contracts. And if they're cost effective, it's still a business. It's the people's money.
Mhm.
And it still has to be, if it's in the negative constantly, that's something that I think we would have to reassess is, do we continue to handle that and then drain our resources like what we need for just the infrastructure? Okay, thank you.
you.
Counselor Gomez.
Phew. I want to bring this conversation down a little bit because I'm a pretty district specific kind of guy. And I don't know if I have the distinction of having the worst street in America, but it's called Lakeshore Drive. Anybody take that route?
We talked about that.
That Lakeshore Drive, and I don't know how long, Dennis, maybe you know the date, but I'd sure like to know if anybody drives on it. And the reason there's no complaints anymore is because nobody drives it. Nobody will even go near that street because you're going to lose an axle. It's absolutely ridiculous. So has anybody looked at it? Is there an end date, some century that we're going to look at this and getting this thing fixed? Because it surrounds a really nice, that nice rim around the lake. And I don't get why nobody's paying attention to that. Maybe it's me.
Sure. There's a couple reasons I mentioned earlier that, again, we're making those investment decisions between sometimes the worst road in the city isn't the best investment. Lakeshore's not going to get any worse. I know what you mean. It's in pretty poor condition. So
Can it get any better?
It could definitely be better, but it's going to require a full rebuild to do it. There's also one property address back there. It's limited return on investment in terms of how to make the decision for where we're going to spend the money. So you also have the best road in the city right now. You have Northern. Northern has just been paved, and that was a huge project trying to get all of those segments all the way from Pueblo Boulevard all the way to I-25 finished. So this last segment just finished. It's been a long time coming, but it's
So are we killing the investment possibilities around that lake because of that street?
so there have been, I would say, other discussions on ways to fund those projects. I believe there's an urban renewal district, for instance, that could potentially
Okay.
raise capital to do some of that work.
Could you bring the mic a little closer to your hand?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I can't hear you.
So again, there's urban renewal district there on the south side that could potentially be utilized to raise some capital to redevelop or reinvigorate that neighborhood. There's some public infrastructure pieces that need to be done on Lakeshore, drainage wise, road wise. Obviously, if you're building a road, you need sidewalks, curb gutter, streetlights, everything else as well. But the pavement condition is very poor, but that is one of those places where we know it's bad. But it is one that we have to defer because if we go fix that road, we're skipping a Northern, we're skipping a Troy, we're skipping an Abriendo. So those are decisions made based on both condition and volumes of traffic that are on those roads. I hope that helps answer the question, but
Well, I'm just
it's
curious. I
noted.
got 3.5 years left in this term and I want to find out, is it gonna, am I pipe dreaming here or I want a straight shot on
Sure.
this so I can go back to my constituents, say, look, this is what we got to look for.
Sure.
There's no end date on this thing, is there?
There is not right now. We have we have 500 miles of road. And so we have touched 20 a year. I don't think it was that much. So in terms of our ability to get all the way through those roads and get back to the next one, you're talking about a very expensive repair per mile on Lakeshore Drive. Again, to the extent that it would facilitate redevelopment, there are tools in place that can help us with that. That TIF is a powerful tool for being able to raise capital for these kinds of projects where development might occur. If property values are low because the road is awful, as soon as a district is in place and the TIF property values go up, that generates more revenue on property tax revenues each year going into that TIF district that can help offset some of those costs. So those are it's a perfect example of a great urban renewal project. But right this moment, it is definitely not on my top 20 or my projects for 2025. And I don't know if it would make 26 or 27 even.
Well, I don't pretend to be a guru on a lot of this capital improvement stuff, but I'm slowly starting to get some of it. But the other issue I have is in reference to why, and I talked to you about this, in reference to that water that's flushing out of the state fair and coming through Bessemer.
Yep.
And working its way through the inflow and the outflow, going to I guess it's the ponds or Runyon Field, whatever.
Right.
And what was problematic for me is when they had the street uncovered. And when I talked to you about it, and you had said they had changed the old 1930 ceramic pipe to PVC. My concern was when they changed that, this is what you had told me, they changed it out, right, to PVC.
They had done repairs to broken sections. So Waterworks had been in Northern, you're talking in Northern.
Right.
So in Northern, obviously there's a clay.
Trap in there.
clay-
Orman,
there's
Spruce, Route.
Right.
That whole area there's got a trap underneath it. And the problem is, if they only changed it to PVC, the backflow is still going to go into the residential areas because it's the water that comes in overwhelms the system and it can only leach out. Well, you got backflow that's still coming in and flooding the neighborhoods. So I'm concerned about the stormwater fees that we're paying and the product we're getting, to be honest with you.
So we've certainly had this conversation a couple of times. These are projects that don't just happen overnight. This is going to require some study and look at viable alternatives of where we can route stormwater. It's a huge drainage basin between the state fair and say I-25. So there's a draft RFP that was put out, and I think it was, I don't know if it was released today or not, but it's getting ready to be for the design services for that project.
We haven't done a study on this before. We're having another study.
Not a design by any stretch. So there are different alternatives also that have appeared in the last year, right? We've talked about working with EPA, for instance, on some properties there and coordinating with them to try to figure out whether that might be a viable path for routing rainwater, stormwater. So there are some different alternatives that probably weren't previously considered that we're going to look at through this context. And then once we've identified at a high level which ones are most cost effective, the designs will be completed as part of that project.
So how do
And
I
we can start
respond to
getting to shovels in the ground.
How do I respond to the constituency and asking, when is this going to get done? So we have to keep on our foundation. Their foundations are going to hell there.
Sure.
They're flooding in basements. What can I tell them?
So this is not a new problem.
It's
I-
been a long
we are-
time problem.
Right. We've talked about a couple of different
Right.
areas, right? We've talked about Paris House Bottoms. You mentioned Northern several times, of course, Bessemer, several areas there that back up. There are places along Bessemer Ditch where when the water is flowing, water can't get into the ditch because the water levels in the ditch are higher than the outfalls of the pipes going in sometimes. So there are a number of issues to fix around there. The project that we're proposing here is a capacity increaser. So essentially, our initial concept here is that the Summit Avenue corridor between Beulah, so right in front of the State Fair, out toward I-25, would become a new underground stormwater superhighway, so to speak. So we'd size the pipes there necessary to drain the State Fair area, that neighborhood, and continue to the east and continue picking up more as you go to the east. There are a couple other spots like McCauley and I-25 McCauley and Abriendo that get flooded intersection there. Along Northern, some of the issues that are going on right now would be helped by this project. Again, we have an undersized pipe that runs through Northern that if we can get some of the water before it gets into Northern, that will help relieve some of the burden that particular part of the system is trying to convey. So it won't even get to Northern. It'll be in a different pipe and being conveyed back to the Arkansas River ultimately.
Are there any recommendations of they could wave a wand, what size pipe we're talking about? You going from 12-inch, 15-inch?
It's definitely going to vary across that whole corridor. So it's going to start at, generally speaking, stormwater pipes like wastewater pipes start small at the ends of the system and work their
Right.
way toward the outfalls and they get larger. We do have stormwater pipes here in the city that are 72 inches. I know there's wastewater
6
pipes that
feet.
are 120 inches, I
You
believe.
can walk through them.
Yes, absolutely. 6 feet, 10
And-
feet.
and-
There are large concrete pipes out there.
All right, so for where we're at, just for the audience's edification, watching, we're here or whatever, but I just want to make sure that I understand so I can go back to them and tell them.
Mhm.
You're talking about anywhere from a 12-inch pipe to 72-inch pipe.
Yeah.
But I guess there's step up and step downs and infalls and outfalls, all the stuff that you're talking
Yeah.
about. I just want to know, do you have an end date on that particular problem in that particular area in Bessemer? What can I tell them?
So I don't have the end date per se.
Okay.
We're targeting the design through this next 12 months or so. Again, that would be as an effort that would result in biddable construction documents. We have about $10 million right now in stormwater utility that will be pushed into a project for the design and for the start of construction for phase one potentially. We are also applying right now for an EPA grant that would potentially, if awarded, bring in another $10 million to help us finish that second phase. Unfortunately, this is one of those deals where you can't just, you've got to do the big end first. And so you got to work your way back towards the state fair. So those are the more expensive parts. Those are certainly the larger pipes, bigger excavation demands. And then as we work back towards the state fair, you'll get more miles of pipe for your dollars because they're going to be smaller.
Before we move on, when I was at the CML conference and I talked to a lot of the engineering vendors, they talked about helping with that grant funding and knowing where that grant funding's at for their projects. And so that's kind of a good service to offer when they're designing. They know the grant funding that's out there. They said that, if we had a grant writer, they'd work with the grant writer to get it and that would offset the cost.
Sure.
But they have the capabilities to do that. And that's always really helpful, especially with these infrastructure projects.
That's one place where we've really been successful these last couple of years in terms of getting grants, applying for grants, telling the city's story, telling our infrastructure needs and identifying grant opportunities that require sometimes no match, but frequently little. And so those are money multipliers. If we can take advantage of those opportunities, that combined again with this construction management capability that we're building, those two things are what we need in order to keep projects moving for the city. So
Yeah.
thank you for pointing that out.
Counselor Boston?
So for my first question, it's probably more so directed towards the clerk or the recorder. So sometimes in the work sessions, we get these PowerPoints uploaded online to either the board portal or the agendas that the public can access. The last couple of work sessions, we haven't had access to these PowerPoints, so I can't scroll through this unless the recorder's doing it. I like to be able to go back through the slides and kind of like analyze the numbers more so. So if we could possibly start getting those uploaded more often.
This was my doing tonight. I got this
I
to
had
them
them
with
last
some
week too,
adjustments
so.
late, so.
Not trying to blame nobody, but if we can
Yeah.
try to get those just so we can look at them a little bit better, it's easier to ask questions. Focusing on some good things, at least you're starting to pave the second worst road in town, Dillon. I know a lot of people were complaining about that one for a long time, so it's.
And it is, for anybody who's driving right there, it looks like it's being paved right now. This is just patchwork going on before the paving work. So it will look much better here. I think they're starting August 1st is what we figured out here. So probably about a month of time frame there to get the final striping down as well. So.
Cool. And then the asset management program, that seems like it's gonna be something that's gonna help streamline a lot of things, get a lot of
Absolutely.
the headaches out of the way. So that's a good positive. So scrolling back to the HVAC techs, you said you had 3,000 hours of deferred maintenance. That's basically preventing you from getting to all that with those two additional
Correct.
positions you want to fix.
That's based on, again, an extrapolation of the existing data that we've got there for the second phase. So we identified about 3,000 labor hours worth of work.
So some of the funding for that, you said you had a half part-time position that can cover half the funding for one of the positions. What about the say you're gonna get rid of one of the positions?
So that's the senior plan.
Yeah, would that funding be able to help fund
So
that or?
It could. So what I did at the bottom of that slide there, it says anticipated budget impact 350K. That is the sum essentially of the additions and deletions. It includes the removal of the senior planner position, which I said was about $110,000 of savings. Most of these are just relatively small things, but the pay band adjustments for the maintenance folks are going to be, it's probably about 175 of that 350. It's about half. But this is a big deal in terms of retention, recruitment, and also, again, health of the facilities maintenance organization, being able to train people in there and get these position descriptions written right, and then set pay rates for those people who are hanging their licenses up for the city, giving them pay that's commensurate with that responsibility. So.
And then did some of the remaining money also help make George a full-time employee?
That's correct.
Okay, 'cause,
So, and I think that particular case, we just, again, last week had a grant opportunity that we're applying for. And if that comes through, I believe that his entire position will be funded and maybe then some as well.
Okay, because George seems like a great guy. I've talked to him a couple times. I'm on the board with him, so he's been doing some good work, the board meeting that I went to. And then when you're coming to those energy efficiency programs, that seems like something that would be beneficial. It seems like a large cost up front, but you're saying it'll decrease costs going forward and they're going to pay for themselves in the
Right.
long run.
And technically speaking, council budgeted, I believe $125,000 for us to assess about a third of our building footprint. So these are the most occupied buildings, the ones that are the largest in terms of energy consumption. Those are the ones that are going to be assessed as part of this initial assessment. We can always go back and do more. We had to put that money into an account to cover the cost should we not do any projects. So if we were going to pay for that, that audit. That audit will result again in a slate of projects that will come forward to us and we get to decide which projects we want to accept or decline. We can set our own acceptance criteria for those projects. But you don't need to make a big capital outlay. It's really no cost upfront. I mean, money's money. There's no magic here. It's the savings that we're going to generate from the energy cost savings will finance the projects. So the benefit to us here is that these energy service companies, the ESCOs that are doing, whichever ESCO gets selected, I guess, to do the audit, they have to guarantee the savings. And if we are compliant with our terms and conditions and the measurement and validations after the fact, bear it out. If there is more energy consumed than they predicted, they owe us a check. And so we have guaranteed energy savings that will cover shortfalls if there are any that are not the city's fault.
So hypothetically, a no-brainer on doing that.
In terms of being able to lay out capital, if the city can do this too, right? We could go put down money and spend it and get payback. But this involves somebody else's, the use of somebody else's money. It's going to take a little bit of time to pay those projects back, but certainly this is a win.
Okay. And then kind of going back to somewhat what Mark said, there has seemed to have been a lot of people that have said that they've ran into a lot of barriers when it comes to some developments going on in the city. Whether it's, commercial or residential. Are we doing anything to try to, like you said, get better returns with all this money that we're putting in, or are we
Sure.
still kind of just running into some roadblocks? Because
So again, that OpenGov system is the part where our permitting, licensing and application or in code enforcement, that system is where all of these land use applications come in, where reviews happen, workflows get set up. We are constantly refining those. The ones that get used all the time are pretty good. The building permit, the subdivision. Sometimes there are unique issues with a subdivision, a state agency that doesn't normally get involved might be involved, or we're developing in a floodplain. And so we've got FEMA involved or something like that. So those kinds of things pop up where we've got to manage those workflows a little bit differently, keep a closer eye on those individual projects. But in general, I think just we're not perfect on that front. We want to get better. Scott in planning has set up a very deliberate drumbeat for developers where Wednesdays, we have a subdivision review committee meeting or a development review committee meeting. Folks come in and they're able to ask questions of any of the city departments, infrastructure departments. Utilities are there. Telecommunications providers are sometimes there. Anybody wanting to do a project can come in and get questions asked before they start their project. So we know what kind of hurdles we're going to jump. CDOT is also normally in attendance at those meetings. So it's really a great opportunity for folks to come in, and we require it on some of our land use applications on subdivisions, for instance. But minor building permits, they don't have to come in and do that if it's not warranted. But generally speaking, a subdivision being a statutory process, we require them to come in and at least get that initial review. And that forum provides a lot of information for developers so that they know what hurdles they have to get over to get their project going. So that's a big help.
Cause I know some people, they're complaining about like little nuanced things like having to plant a certain amount of bushes or having a certain size easement when other properties in the area don't do those things.
Right.
They're being forced to plant bushes in the middle of February when there's, snow and stuff going on.
Sure.
Some of that stuff, just seems to be nuanced that I understand like the reasoning behind it. Cause you don't want to just have like a giant, metropolitan urban kind of thing with no shrubbery around, but little things like that preventing big projects kind of seems silly.
Sure. And there are some tools that we do use for
Temporary.
deferring landscaping. We don't want to plant grass in February. It's not the right time. Or July sometimes, right? Ultimately, the builders can put money in escrow, get the stuff done, and then we just return their deposits back. But that way they can move forward with their building permits and get their businesses open without delay if it's just a landscaping related issue. And sometimes for other things too that are not life, health, safety, or those kinds of functions. If it's life, health, safety, typically it's stuff that's got to be done.
Okay, that makes sense, obviously, but I've just had specific, like those kind of things mentioned to me as deterrents or roadblocks that developers I know have ran into here.
And if any of you are hearing any of those things, please refer them back to us so we can talk to them. If we don't know those issues are of concern, may not hear it, but generally they'll bring them up to us. But if you're hearing those concerns, bring them to our attention, please.
I think that's it.
Counselor Latino, do you have anything? Yes, I noticed that the temporary occupancy certificates that they give is in such like a landscaping issue. So they'll give it to a temporary occupancy certificate in order for the business to go forward. And then they have to, take care of things when the season's better.
Right.
Counselor Flores.
Yeah, I want to go back to when I started, because I was just thinking I did a terrible job, I think, of trying to explain what my concern was about. And I'm looking at last year's budget, the 2024 budget, and in the area, it's under capital improvement plan. And I noticed that we've got capital, not on your slides. I'm
Okay,
looking at,
sorry.
I'm talking about here. That we have like 3 different pages. One of the pages is project detail by funding, project detail 5-year, and then project detail. This is like pie in the sky, unfunded. We have the aquatic center there as an example. I mean, we just don't have the money. But what my concern originally was that a lot of these contractual arrangements we have with the Zoological Society, with HSPPR, with the people that run, the ice arena, all of these different organizations, that they might be ignored.
Okay.
And I'm looking at project detail by funding, and I mean, you go down the list. I mean, we're talking about Elmwood, cart path repair. I mean, vehicle purchases. I mean, there's lots of stuff here with all of these. Nowhere do you find the zoo, and nowhere do you find some of the other organizations. And maybe I'm missing it, but, and I don't want to spend the time now to look for it, but I didn't see anything.
So you keep coming back to the zoo, so I'll focus on that one just for a second, but. in
I'm only
terms of-
using them as an example because I think if I dug deeper, I could maybe bring up, we have the mountain park in Beulah, we
Yep.
have the issue with the
Nature Center.
nature center,
There's,
So I'm just using them as an example.
sure, and again, to the extent that it's a maintenance related issue that needs some kind of corrective action or a roof needs to be repaired urgently, those kinds of things, it's a city building, and if it's our responsibility under the lease, we're gonna take care of that. Even if it was not ours under the lease, it's the city's building. We need to make a decision about whether it's in the city's interest to make those repairs or not. So at those times, we bring those
Yeah,
issues
but
forward for.
that
consideration.
seems like a different model. That is reactive.
That is not where I want to be,
whereas
correct.
And it looks like there's been a lot of
Yeah.
work. Very small stuff, IT stuff, vehicles, cart paths, you just go on and on. Somebody took some time to really check as to what, the priority would be for the next year.
Sure.
And then you've got what really worries me is we now have a 5-year plan. Nowhere in there are these organizations like the zoo and anyone else that are in that, even in that path. So
Yeah.
I just bring that up, and I mean, that's something that we could work on this year and take a look at.
One other piece of the funding, I guess, associated with the zoo, those buildings would be city buildings. If we're taking care of those, would be a general fund type activity. You mentioned Elmwood Golf Course, for instance. That's an enterprise that's funded separately.
Yeah,
and so
I noticed.
those are, there are different entities in the budget as you're looking at that CI cost code or PL or different ED or EW for Elmwood and WS for Walking Stick. Those are kind of indicative of the different funding pots that the funds are coming from, and some of those are separate enterprises as well. So if we can help answer questions on that, let us know.
And then just a comment, because it did come up this week. Somebody called me this week about the Wild Horse development over on the north end. And I don't know if this is true or not. He says they're going into their 5th year now, that this has been on the drawing block. And he was really asking me about if I could move this along faster, because there's a good possibility of a large major grocery chain that wants one, plot there to build a grocery store, which we really need in the community. But
Sure.
I don't know what's going on there. It could be all their fault, but could you look at that?
Sure. And we've been working with them quite a bit on the access permitting issue, kind of the same issues I brought up earlier about that topic. This was one very specific place where CDOT and the city worked together with the developer to identify terms and conditions for an access permit that were appropriate. It took some time to get there. And so that was one of those cases where they certainly felt like the project was delayed as a result of this interaction that had to happen. But statutorily, CDOT has some authority in the subdivision process. And so that's what they're going through, annexation and
It's
subdivision.
right next to Highway 50.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so that access off of what is Wild Horse Road right now will ultimately become an extension of Pueblo Boulevard to the north. And Wild Horse will be realigned to hit that extension. They're planning and they've provided the right of way associated with that project, but
Okay.
they've got several steps to go before that subdivision's ready.
Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
President Aliff.
Done?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I move to go into executive session for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and or instructing negotiators under CRS Section 24-6-402, Parent 4, Parent E, Parent I. And the following additional details are provided for identification purposes. Successor collective bargaining agreement between the city and IBPO Local 537. And for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions under CRS excuse me, section 24-6-402, parent 4, parent B, and the following additional details are provided for identification purposes. Discussion with outside counsel regarding pending litigation relating to ordinance number 10698. And for the purpose of discussing the purchase, acquisition, lease, transfer, or sale of any real, personal, or other property interest pursuant to CRS 24 6 402, parent A, and for determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and or instructing negotiators under CRS Section 24 6 402, parent 4, parent E, parent I. And the following additional details are provided for identification purpose: the Pope Block Building. No adoption of any proposed policy, position, resolution, rule, regulation, or formal action shall occur at any executive session that is not open to the public.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
You need a
Did we
motion.
get a,
Oh,
I'll be the second.
Oh. A motion to,
I made the motion.
okay, a second.
Dennis is a second.
Okay.
Now.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
The time is 9:06 on July 15th, 2024, and we are adjourning the work session.